what is more important for the Ukrainians is a guarantee that kind of giving up or temporarily surrendering that land to the Russians doesn't just give Russia a platform from which to launch more attacks in the future. They need to see that the US is behind them, Europe is behind them, and that any further attempts by Russia to take more territory or to end Ukraine's sovereignty, which is still ultimately the end goal here, will be thwarted.
Now, world leaders, including Keir Starmer and other European heads of state, have backed Ukraine after yet another U-turn from President Trump. The US president suggested yesterday that Ukraine couldn't win the war with Russia. He also pushed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to give up the Donbas province after a phone call with President Putin of Russia last week. Let's talk to Sarah Baxter, the director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting. Sarah, well, we've been here before, haven't we? Donald Trump does have a tendency to believe the last person he spoke to on this.
Well, yes, absolutely. And of course, Zelensky was very much looking forward to his meeting in Washington. It was going to go very well. It looked friendly on the outside, but the shouting match on the inside was very unwelcome, I think, to the Ukrainians, because Donald Trump, as you suggested, just been speaking to Vladimir Putin. Certainly Tomahawk cruise missiles were off the table for Ukraine, and now Donald Trump wants to have another stab at peacemaking one-to-one between himself and Vladimir Putin while bossing Zelensky around.
Can we just come back to you in a moment? We want to bring in Maxim Tucker, who's the Times Ukraine reporter. Maxim, Trump is now claiming that this war just isn't winnable for Ukraine, which wasn't what he was saying not that long ago. What is the reality?
Well, it depends on how you define winning, and obviously there are lots of different variables that are involved in winning a war. I mean, Ukraine maintaining its sovereignty and being able to maintain that for the foreseeable future, having a sustainable future, that would be for many people winning the war. And to do that, it needs guarantees, security guarantees. Now, to win the war on the battlefield against Russia is obviously a different task. It's extremely difficult, but there are certain things that Ukraine's allies could do to change that calculus. I mean, if we're talking about having an air policing mission over the west of Ukraine, maybe west of the Dnipro, shooting down unmanned drones and jets that fly over that territory, that would do a great deal to helping Ukraine's ability to fight Russia, to drive Russia back. I mean, I think territorial gains by Ukraine at this point look very unlikely, but there are lots of things that the Allies could do and haven't done to help Ukraine win on the battlefield as well.
Right. And is there hope in Ukraine that Europe will actually properly deliver, and soon?
Well, the Ukrainians are very frustrated that Europe hasn't woken up still, even though now the rhetoric has changed from European leaders and they're talking more about realizing the dangers. And, you know, Russian drones over Poland have caused some consternation. The money isn't there to back it up in quite the same way. And the bureaucracy of kind of building new weapons, delivering weapons, creating new armies to face down the Russians, to deter the Russians, it's still incredibly slow going. I mean, we're still talking about years in the future where Europe might be ready to actually fight a war against Russia. And in the meantime, Ukraine is Europe's best bet for defending itself. Ukraine has a million-strong armed forces, which nowhere else in Europe can muster. So Europe really, it's in its own best interest to equip Ukraine as best it can, because Ukraine is Europe's best form of defence against Russia.
I know that you have written quite a lot about some of the incredible innovations made by Ukraine during the course of this conflict. I think the truth is that will have an impact on, well, you tell me, on presumably the future of warfare.
Yeah, warfare tomorrow will look completely different from how it has done in previous wars. I mean, now we have drones launching drones, drones being given a bigger range by other drones in the air, repeating signals, autonomous weapons that can hunt down and kill individuals in the last kilometre. The capability is there to send a drone on a completely autonomous mission for hundreds of miles. I think they will also change the security calculus of all kinds of things in the future as well. I mean, it's astonishing to me that we haven't seen a drone assassination, or at least a drone assassination attempt so far. I mean, with FPV drones being able to be flown the way they are. So I think drones will change the way wars are fought. And Europe again is scrambling to kind of catch up on that front. It's beginning to realize that Ukrainians have developed the cutting edge technology and trying to bring some in from Ukraine
Right.
to Europe.
I mean, that's a terrifying prospect, a drone assassination. But you used FPV there. That means what, Maxim?
It's a first-person view drone, so it's a drone that you control by strapping on a pair of goggles and seeing what the drone sees, even if you're flying it remotely from tens of miles away. And these are being used on the battlefield in Ukraine to hunt down individual soldiers who are running away from the drones. Then there's some explosive attached to it. So you can very effectively target individuals with these kind of weapons.
Very briefly, if the war were to end tomorrow, frozen, everything frozen as it is now, how much land would Ukraine give up or have to give up?
So we're talking about 20% of Ukrainian territory that Russia currently occupies. That is about the size of Poland, sorry, not the size of Poland, the size of Hungary or Portugal. So it's a serious amount of land from already a very large country that Ukraine would be able to expect it to give up. But I think what is more important for the Ukrainians is a guarantee that kind of giving up or temporarily surrendering that land to the Russians doesn't just give Russia a platform from which to launch more attacks in the future. They need to see that the US is behind them, Europe is behind them, and that any further attempts by Russia to take more territory or to end Ukraine's sovereignty, which is still ultimately the end goal here, will be thwarted.
Thank you very much, Maxim Tucker, the Times Ukraine reporter. Sarah, is there any chance that Donald Trump will finally come to the realization that President Putin may very well be playing him?
I think he did feel that. He felt the lack of respect from Vladimir Putin after the Alaska summit when nothing happened. And in fact, attacks on civilians in Ukraine intensified. But I think Trump sees himself as a sort of Kissingerian realist in this. When he says Ukraine can't win, it doesn't mean that he thinks that Ukraine should therefore fold. And I think there is a misreading here. I mean, he does think, and I think fair enough, like many Ukrainians, that Europe should step up. And meantime, he thinks that on the battlefield, Putin can't advance and Ukraine is not capable of winning its territory back. And therefore, he's really talking more about you've got to give up not all of that region, but freeze the lines where they are. And in some ways, we're just back to square one when Donald Trump came in. And I don't think that this is necessarily unreasonable to say, well, why don't we try and have a ceasefire now and then build up security guarantees of the kind that Maxim was talking about. And so what you're seeing is differences of tone rather than substance on where we've been now over the future of Ukraine for a while. And he needs to cajole, thinks he needs to cajole Putin into a ceasefire because otherwise Putin could, Trump says he's got all the cards because Putin's got the nuclear missiles. And then, so cajole Putin and bully Zelensky into coming to some sort of agreement. That's the tactics that he's decided are likely to be most effective. It doesn't mean necessarily that this is such a disaster for Ukraine, because I think Ukraine would desperately like peace, but it wants peace, as Maxim says, that is for the future, for the long term.
And just a brief word on President Trump's reported inclusion in the so-called Epstein files. I should say that we're going to be hearing on Times Radio from Amy Wallace, the journalist who helped Virginia Giuffre write her memoir. That's after 3:30 this afternoon. Is that still something that is setting America aflame? Are people still talking about the Epstein files and President Trump's possible involvement?
Not much, I'm afraid. Of course, with the Epstein files, you never know whether they've subsided and they're going to come back to bite, as Peter Mandelson found and as Prince Andrew's found for decades. Every time he thinks he's escaped the coils, then something else happens. The Americans are kind of interested in what's happened to Prince Andrew, but they don't get the distinction between losing the title Duke of York and being called Prince Andrew, which, sounds more like Prince Charming and quite nice, really.
Well, they're not alone in being baffled there, I don't think.
Yeah, and then for Donald Trump, he has really sat on his own supporters over this, and he is saved by one crucial thing. Firstly, the government is in shutdown, so Congress is not sitting. There isn't a majority. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is refusing to sit. A Democrat has done for weeks, a recently elected one in Arizona, so that she can't be the casting vote to release the so-called Epstein files, in which Donald Trump's name does appear. But the other saving grace for Donald Trump is, for whatever reason, he did stop being friends with Epstein before Epstein was convicted of sex offences. And there is a distinction there. However much we think they were pally and used to play around together or whatever, he did give up his friendship with Epstein. Now, very likely for his own reasons, but Lord Mandelson and Prince Andrew didn't have the wit to do that.
No, it's a very good point. Thank you for making it. Sarah Baxter, the director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting.